All right, so today we're going to talk real quick about two major topics in Gravit. The first one is guides, creating basically guidelines you can work around to make sure everything's mirrored correctly, lined up properly to how you want it. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more about transformations and the transform panel. And very specifically, we're going to look at the transformations that allow you to mirror and flip objects so you can create duplicates of something that matches perfectly. So I've got Gravit open. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to make it 500 by 500 pixels. And so I have this nice square. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here to View, and we're going to go down to Canvas, and you're going to make sure that you've got Show Rulers checkmarked. The shortcut for that is Control Alt R. So I can click on it there, they appear, or Control Alt R, so you can make those rulers appear. And I'm going to have them up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on my artwork, so it's a little bit bigger. So you'll notice what's happened is that we've added these rulers across the top and the left-hand side, and they're demarked in pixels, okay? So I created something that was 500 pixels wide and 500 pixels tall. You'll notice that the upper left corner is at 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis. And now it counts out and it comes out to 500. Now it's kind of hard to see because these demarcations or the separations are a little odd, but that's just based on how you're zoomed in. So if I come in here and zoom in a little more, obviously it's a little easier to see. Okay, but I'm going to zoom back out. So guides are just lines that allow you to organize your workspace. So you can snap different artwork to it. So if you're building a square or a rectangle and you want it to be perfectly lined up with a certain point, you can do that. But these guides are ones that you can build, and they don't affect the final version of your artwork because you can remove them. So to add a guide, I'm going to come up to my ruler, and you notice my cursor changes from the small black arrow to this white arrow. And if I left click and hold and just drag, I get this line that's coming out. And so I'm creating a line on the y-axis. You'll notice on the left-hand side, right at the edge, there is a series of numbers, and that's telling you what pixels I'm at. Now, since I created this artwork as 500 by 500 pixels, that means that the middle should be at 250. So I'm going to scroll until that number hits 250 and let go. And I've dropped a line in here. I'm going to do the same thing from the left-hand side so I can create a vertical axis. So now I've got two guidelines that split my canvas or my page directly into 4 separate pieces. And so now what's really neat is that if I come in and I want to create a rectangle, I can draw my rectangle, that's fine. But now I can grab it and I can move it around. And if I come up right against this line, you'll notice it sort of jumps and it snaps to that line. And I can snap down into this corner. I can come over here, snap across there, and it lets me line those things up. Just as if, you'll notice if I get to the corner up here, it snaps it into the corner of the edge of the canvas. And this can also be used for things like lines. So if I start drawing a line, I want it to end right there. Oh, hey, it's snapped to it. I can grab this end, come up here. Oh, it'll snap right to that. And it gives me a way to sort of line up certain endpoints. So if I have this line and I need it to match up perfectly with, for example, I'm going to start a line here and I want it to match up vertically right there, that lets it match perfectly and lets it build. So we can do this with all sorts of things and lets us actually build the artwork from the outside as we're working. Okay, so that's something to think about. These guidelines are what's going to sort of build our shape pattern. Okay, it lets us line things up without any problem. And you can add as many as you want. So perhaps I want one at 100 pixels this way, and I need one over here at, say, 450 pixels. Okay, so I can divide my artwork however I want to create a single piece of art. So with guides allowing you to sort of divide your artboard or your page, you can really organize things back and forth and keep them very symmetrical. Now I'm going to go ahead, if I want to delete one of these, I just drag it back up to the ruler. and let go, and it disappears. But I'm going to leave this centerpiece because what I want to talk about next is flipping and transformations using the transform tool. So I'm going to actually go ahead and use a piece of text so that you can see exactly how this is going to work. So I've got this piece of text, and I'm going to blow it up a little bit, and I'm going to make the actual text a little bit bigger. There it is. There's my size. So maybe I want this to be 60, okay? And the reason I'm doing this is because with these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see how this works with the transform tool. So I'm going to snap this right to that center. So it's snapped into the corner down here. So I'm going to come up here to this transform panel with this selected, and it gives us these options. So the first ones obviously are the move options. So for example, if I want to move something in the X direction by say 200 pixels, I just do that and hit apply. Oh, what happened? Oh, I've got something left over. So we're going to undo that. So what happened there is that I still had something selected. So I'm going to turn that back to 0, make sure everything else here is 0, and then I'm going to try that again. So 100 pixels in the X direction with all my defaults, hit apply, and you notice it moves it to the right by 100 pixels. I can do the same thing on my Y values, change this X back to 0, hit apply, and it moves it down by 100 pixels. Okay. Now you'll notice every time you go to the transform tool, it leaves the last thing you did in place. Now the reason for that is so that if you make one change to something and you need to do it to a whole bunch of things, make the exact same change, it means that, for example, I'm going to copy this. So let's say I wanted to move both of these 100 pixels to the right. I can click on this one, transform it, change this to 100 pixels, change that to 0, hit apply. And then I can just come down here, grab this one, hit transform, and everything's the same. So I can make that same transformation over and over if I need to. So always make sure when you're working with the transform panel that you reset things back to 0 as needed. Okay. So X and Y lets you move it in the X direction, so your horizontal direction, or in the Y direction, your vertical direction. And you can do those at the same time. So if you set both of them to a number and hit apply, it's going to move both of them. So I increase the X and the Y. I'm going to undo that. And now let's look at a couple of the other transforms. The first one we have is scale. So scale is how big something is. So right now it's at 100%, which is just the size it's at. Let's say I want to double that in both directions. So X and Y, I can apply. And there we go. We doubled it. Now, if I wanted to go back, 100% it again, but nothing happened. Why not? Well, 100% is the same size something currently is. So if I want this to go back down to the original size, I actually have to type in 50%, so half size. Okay, so that's one of the things that's a little confusing when we look at these percentages. And I'm going to change these back to 100 so that I don't change the size again. We're going to jump down here to skew, and let's look at this. So skew has to do with taking something and sort of tilting it at an odd direction. So let's see what happens. And I'm actually not going to use the numbers for this. We're going to use just a good old-fashioned rectangle. So if I skew this rectangle, we're going to say by 25 degrees and hit apply, what happened? You'll notice that the top points and the bottom points have shifted a little bit around this central piece. And what's happened is that there's now a 25-degree angle in that shift. But you'll notice the top and bottom are still parallel. Okay, so we've turned a rectangle into a parallelogram. I come back to my transform panel, do it even more, say instead of 25, say 80, apply. Look at that gigantic, because it's creating this 80-degree angle. Now, that's in the X direction. If I do it in the Y direction, again, 25 degrees, that's what happens. It shifts the Y set by 25 degrees difference. And once again, I can always come in and do both of them at the same time, so 25 and 25, and we can shift both the X and the Y direction in this skew. Okay, so this is a way to manipulate shapes and do things a little differently. If I come back here and I skew this one, well, you'll notice my text disappeared. That's because the text itself couldn't fit inside that shape. So I'm going to undo that and get those shapes back. So skew again just sort of, excuse me, manipulates the X and Y relationship between the points based on a certain degree of change in the X and Y angles. Okay, I'm going to bring this back down to the center. Change my skews both back to 0. So copy lets you literally make a copy of something. And these copies are just duplications. It's kind of like Control C, Control V, copy paste, except you can do certain things. So if I just hit apply with all the values at 0 and change my copies to 1 and hit apply, nothing seems to happen except over here in the layers panel, you'll notice a second one popped up. So if I come back in here, now I have 2 of them. I'm going to delete that. The power of the transform copy tool is that I can make a copy, and let's say I want that copy to move 100 pixels over and 100 pixels down, and hit apply, and there it is. It duplicates it and does the transform all at once. So that copy function is kind of neat. And if I say I want 3 copies, same thing. Notice it copies each next piece along that same transformation. So the first one was 100 to the X and 100 to the Y down. The next one was, again, 100 pixels farther to the right and down. And then the third one, same thing. It allows you to manipulate and duplicate things really easily. So now let's look at the last piece that we really care about, okay? And that is going to be our rotations, excuse me. So the first rotation, the one with the up arrow here, is sort of your classic rotation about an axis point. So if I say I want to rotate 90 degrees and apply, it rotates around this central axis point. If I do that 4 times, I've gone all the way around a 360-degree circle. I'm back where I began. I can also type in, 270. I can rotate however much I want. So we're going to get back to sort of the square one. So that left rotate is just your standard rotation around this axis point. Once again, if I grab this point and say, for example, put it right there and do 90 degrees again, well, nothing changed. Why not? Because I'm not using it correctly. So we're going to hit 0 there. Now, what I really want to point out to you is this piece right here, this rotate with the down arrow. It's a little confusing because of just the nomenclature, but what this is this allows you to rotate about an axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this and we're going to click this box. So we're going to pick the right-hand side of our piece. So you notice there are these boxes around here. So there are 8 boxes and 1 in the center, and they correspond to the anchor points on the box around our numbers. So these are called bound anchor points, and they are part of the bounding box, so the box that surrounds these numbers. If I come in here now and I say, well, I want to rotate by 90 degrees around that point and hit apply, well, what happened? It flipped, didn't it? So I'm going to do that again and again. So what's happening? It's rotating and flipping each time. I come back here, I go negative 90. Let's see what happens. Well, it keeps going the same way because it doesn't care about positives and negatives. If I come back here, use the left-hand side. Oh, now it's flipping over the left-hand edge. So what this is doing is we pick where we want it to flip over. So which point, okay, either on the left side, the right side, and then we just hit the apply and it rotates it. Now, why is this important? Well, it's really important because you can create perfectly mirrored drawings. For example, I'm going to grab this tool out real quick, and I'm just making a random shape. Doesn't matter. But the thing is, I'm going to use this central guide to make sure that I end up back in the middle. So because I've used this center guide, this arc starts and ends directly on this central piece. So if I grab this and I want to duplicate it, I want a perfect mirror on the other side, I could transform it. I could say that I want 1 copy around this at 90 and hit apply. And what happens? It's now duplicated it on the other side and it perfectly matches up. This is a super powerful tool to create a symmetrical piece. Now, if I were to grab this and, for example, try to add a fill, it only fills half of it. So what we do want to do is we want to make sure that when we do something like this, you have to connect them. So we're going to collect both of them. We're going to go up to modify, path, and we're going to connect path lines. This is what we learned back when we did the line tool and unify them. So what happened? It connected this down here. That's no good because what's happening, and it's hard to see if I can, I'm going to drag both of these in here because I want to show you something in here. So right now, all I'm looking at is the outlines. You'll notice that there's a gap here. They don't actually line up perfectly. And that does happen, okay? So it is something we'll have to think about working about. How do we make this line up? But I could select both of them, click fill, and suddenly they're both filled. But this is a really great way to create a perfectly mirrored shape in Gravit so that you can use that to just build half of an object and then duplicate it and create the second half. And that's really the focus of this using guides and these transform tools is how do you line stuff up perfectly? And then how can you simplify your workflow? How can you make it so that instead of having to do everything, you might be able to do half of it or just a quarter of it? I mean, for example, if you're worried about making, you're making a snowflake pattern, maybe you'll start here and you just sort of start drawing your snowflake. Well, now I grab this and I transform it across. That's perfectly duplicated. Grab all of this, transform it, and now I want to transform it across the bottom. Oh, there we go. Oops, I accidentally did that twice. Okay, we can grab this one, transform, cross that side. Whoop, wrong button. Oh, I've got my number wrong. That's why. And a lot of this is experimentation. Like I said, this year, I'm new to Gravit too, so I'm learning it with you. We'll hit apply. There we go. There's our copy there. So now we can create this quadruple perfect shape that's all identical. It looks kind of like maybe a bug or something, but each side is identical to the other. Again, because it lines up perfectly, we can fill it with a shape. Now, why isn't it filling in here? Well, because these lines are what's connected, not what's in here. So there are lots of ways that we'll learn later on to work on reconnecting all of this into a single shape. And we'll practice together because this is learning a new system, both for you and for me. And that's what's really kind of exciting is that we get to dive into this together in the future. But that's the basics of guides and of using the transform tools a little more in depth. And we'll dive into them a lot more in depth in a little bit when we start looking at the pen tool.